Alright, I am back with another video, and today we're going to be exploring one of my favourite underrated multi-class combos, that being Monk and Warlock. Now that may seem crazy to anyone who's familiar with tabletop and just kind of BG3 in general, as Monk already is pretty tricky to multi-class, and for most people looking at it initially, has absolutely zero synergy with Warlock. But that is where I think most people are a bit wrong. I think it is completely underrated because it actually can produce quite potent and powerful results, and surprisingly enough, a lot of the flavour that you can get from the various Warlock and Monk subclasses actually do have some overlap, which can create interesting combinations and very thematic builds. Today we're going to be focusing on making what I'm calling the Woman in the Mist, which is basically this person who, if I kind of paint a picture for you, okay, imagine this. Imagine you are a group of guards standing outside of Envergor Tash's, little fortress, Worm's Rock in Baldur's Gate, and as you're standing guard doing your vigilant duty, it's late into the night, the moon shines high in the sky, and you don't notice it right away. You don't notice it. But mist is starting to build at your feet. You notice that the ground is no longer wholly visible, and that mist is starting to rise more and more. This thick, gleaming mist with this moonlight shimmering and sparkling within. And then all of a sudden, as that mist starts to grow thicker and thicker, it goes dark. The mist turns black as shadow. And in the distance, all you can see is an ethereal woman beckoning you closer, and you're compelled to listen, and you don't know why. That is the kind of thing we're building today. We are going to be building a kind of like charmer slash assassin type character. I say assassin, it's more like just like a, kind of win without, proper combat. It's hard to explain, but basically this person is going to lure you in, kind of like a siren. There you go, a siren is a good word for it. It's just we're not in the ocean, we're on land. A siren of the land. That's actually another cool word for it. Women in the Mist or siren of the land. We'll see what the title of this video is going to be. But I also decided to take a bit of inspiration that, surprisingly enough, I haven't really done for Warlocks. And that is to actually look at a patron to base the build on. I mean, obviously I've done builds with patrons in mind in the past, but to specifically look at a patron for inspiration for a build hasn't really been a thing that I've done. However, there's this one potential Archfey patron called the Queen of Air and Darkness, who is a very, very big deal, who felt perfect for this. Feel free to look them up on the Forgotten Realms wiki, but just so you know, they are a bit evil, and their avatar is known to be a woman of ethereal beauty who is also very, very evil. So, I thought it would work perfectly for a build like this. And overall, I think it's going to be a really, really interesting combination that you guys are going to get a kick out of. So, without further ado, let's get into the build. First up, we are going to be kicking things off as a Monk. A lot of what I want this build to do comes from the general functionality of Monk, and just starting with that at our first level is going to give us a lot of the stuff that's going to make this build feel quite good, no matter what kind of leveling scheme we take after this. So, at level 1 of Monk, you're going to gain access to a few things, namely Flurry of Blows, and your bonus action Unarmed Strike. So just by attacking with your Monk weapon or Unarmed Strike, you're going to be able to do another attack as a bonus action. It's only going to do a d4 at base at the moment, however, it does work out in the long run, just as being able to just do more damage with your bonus action, which Warlocks don't often have a consistent use for their bonus action, so having the ability to do this is pretty nice. We also are going to be wearing clothing with this build, so having Unarmored Defense is going to work out quite nicely for us, as well as the fact that, like I said, we are going to get access to Monk weapons, which means anything that is not two-handed is going to use our dexterity instead of our strength, which is very, very important for later. Obviously now our Unarmed Strikes deal 1d4 of damage, and we can make that bonus action Unarmed Strike, like I said. We are going to be playing as an elf for this build, because when I think of like kind of ethereal otherworldly beauty, I do think of elves. That's just kind of how they're portrayed in popular media, so I decided to go with that here. And thanks to the mods that are available on all platforms when it comes to being able to design your character, I think we've got quite a good ethereal look here. I'm quite impressed with it, actually. I'm quite proud of myself. But anyways, first up, we also get Elven Weapon Training, allowing us to use long swords, short swords, short bows, and long bows, so you have a bit of extra stuff to work with there. We also gain Dark Vision and Fey Ancestry, meaning we have advantage on saving throws against being charmed, and magic cannot put us to sleep. We're going to be using a lot of charming effects with this build, so having advantage against those same effects does at least make sense to me from a lore perspective. For our sub race, I did choose Wood Elf. This build almost has kind of a druidic vibe to it as well. well, kind of like a manipulation of nature in some sense with like the mist and all that, so I did feel like Wood Elf made a bit of sense to give us a little bit of extra movement speed, but again, any race/sub-race combo will work here. And finally, our ability scores, which are going to look a bit strange, but of course with a strange multi-class, we do have some strange options. So, we have strength at 8, we don't really need it. Dexterity is also at 8, because yes, we are going to be using the Gloves of Dex to bump this up. I know it's a bit boring, but it is the best way to actually make this multi-class particularly functional, and is one of the reasons why this is possible, where in tabletop it probably isn't as effective. So, we are going to have Dexterity at 8, but obviously you don't get the Gloves of Dexterity until a bit later into Act 1, so I would recommend starting with either a typical monk stat spread, so probably 16 Dex, 16 Wisdom, 14 Constitution, or a typical Warlock spread, so something like 16 Charisma, maybe 16 Dex, 14 Constitution. Basically just slap a 16 on Dexterity to start, and then train it out later with Withers when you've got the Gloves of Dexterity. Next up for Constitution is at 14. I would like this to be higher, especially for Constitution saving throws, but alas, this is about where we're going to be able to get it. This build is about not actually being hit at all, rather than taking hits itself. With the various effects and abilities that we're going to have, it's going to be very unlikely that we're going to be taking lots of damage with this build, especially when working as part of a group, and in my testing that was usually the case, so having a slightly lower Constitution actually does work here. Intelligence is at 10, because we don't really need it, but I didn't really want it at 8 either. Wisdom is at 17, we're going to be bumping this up with a half feat later, and Charisma is at 16, we'll be able to bump this up as well. So overall, because these are going to be our two main spellcasting stats, that's why we want them as high as we do. Next up, skill proficiencies. Now, I did actually make a mistake with this build, but I'm going to tell you to correct here. With this, I took the Charlatan background for Sleight of Hand and Deception. This was a bad move. You want to take the Entertainer background because it's going to give you performance proficiency. Now, that may not seem like it makes sense yet, but trust me, it will by the time we get to the end of this video. So make sure you take the Entertainer background, which is going to give you Acrobatics and Performance, in which case you can swap some of the other ability scores around here. Here we are going to get Athletics and Insight from our skill proficiencies at level 1. However, I would swap out Athletics if you already have Acrobatics for something else. It's entirely up to you what you want to pick up here. So just kind of pick your poison. So other than that, we also do gain Stealth because we are a Wood Elf, and as well as Perception because we are an Elf. So we do get a couple of extra proficiencies here, and Stealth we absolutely want, so I'm glad to have that here. Just remember, take the Entertainer background, not the background that I have here. Let's move on. Now, next up at level 2, it's really up to you whether you want to take the Monk levels first or the Warlock levels first. I do think we have enough of kind of what we want from Monk to kind of start taking the Warlock levels here, as I do think that is going to give us more of the feel of the build. We did want it to start out as Monk, basically to get those bonus action attacks and dexterity-based weapon attacks, like to kind of just get that extra bonus action attack, so we always feel a little bit monkish, but we do want to start getting that Warlock stuff straight away, so let's go and get it. So we're going to be multiclassing into Warlock here, giving us access to 2 cantrips. And yes, I am going to be using Eldritch Blast for this one. It makes a ton of sense here to just grab Eldritch Blast and have it be a fun kind of ranged cantrip. And it's another part of the fun of multiclassing Monk and Warlock, because you can be an unarmed fighter with the ability to fire beams out of your hands. I mean, come on, like, who doesn't want that? That's Dragon Ball. That's Dragon Ball. A lot of people try to make Dragon Ball characters in this game. That's how you do it. Warlock Monk. That easy. We also do get to pick another cantrip at this level, and because we're going to have a lot of movement speed and maneuverability around the battlefield, I absolutely recommend Booming Blade here. Again, Booming Blade is from the Mistress Spells mod, but this is available on all platforms, and it is extremely well balanced and is based on tabletop D&D 5e content, so in my opinion, it is basically kind of just a vanilla thing at this point. If you disagree with me, that's fine. Feel free to take any other vanilla cantrips instead. However, I do still recommend Mistress Spells if you're not going to take any other gameplay altering mods. It just opens up so many opportunities for you in a lore-friendly, fun, and balanced way. A Booming Blade is going to be great. What happens with Booming Blade is when you use it as a weapon attack, basically, it's just you cast a weapon attack. It's a weird way of saying it, but it is how it works. You make a weapon attack, dealing a bonus 0 thunder damage at this level, but as you level up and your cantrip scale up, this will do some extra damage just right out. However, if the attack lands and the target becomes wreathed in booming energy, which will deal 1d8 of thunder damage to them if they willingly move. Attack cantrips do not stack with extra attack, so you can't use the same cantrip twice, but if you attack with this, you can use a regular extra attack, and this spell can be cast while you are silenced, which I think is really cool. But basically, the whole idea of this is we are going to be able to hit them with Booming Blade, deal that little bit of extra thunder damage when we get to higher levels, and then move away from our enemy using our movement options, like Monk's Step of the Wind, for example, and then they're just going to have to move to catch up with you, and then they'll just take more thunder damage. It's actually a pretty brutal combination, but it's just going to be a nice bread and butter for this build. However, you may want to take some other cantrip options later on if you decide that going for the kind of using a melee weapon thing is not really a thing for this build, but I did find that the melee weapon variant did work out stronger, but we'll get more to that when we talk about the packed boons. Next up, our subclass, and we are going to be going with the Archfey, if that wasn't obvious. Archfey is going to do a ton of things for us flavor-wise and mechanic-wise. We're going to gain access to 2 additional spells on our spell list, that being Fairy Fire and Sleep, which are both spells that would be great for this build, but I'm actually going to be skipping them this time around. The main thing I want here is Fey Presence, allowing us to charm or frighten nearby foes with the Feywild's beguiling, disturbing magics. Basically, you can either charm or frighten, so cause enemies to kind of be passive and chill around you, or basically make it so they run away from you. Or, I mean, they cannot move, and frightened creatures have disadvantage on ability checks and attack rolls, and charm is that the spellcaster has advantage on charisma checks and dialogue, and they can't attack you. Basically, either they don't move, and you can kind of dodge their attacks a bit easier, or you can kind of fuck with them. So I think it's kind of fun. So the fact that this has usage both in and out of combat is great for this build, which is why I wanted to pick it up. Next up, we do get to pick 2 spells, and again, with thanks to Mistress Spells, we do have a few extra options available to us. However, for now, I think I'm going to pick some fairly standard options. We're going to be going for Charm Person, which seems odd, but I do want as much charming as I can with this build, and Charm Person is going to work out really, really nicely for us, especially since I didn't take Friends as a cantrip for once. So Charm Person is going to be great for us because it allows us to charm a humanoid, preventing it from attacking us, giving us advantage on charisma checks and dialogue. This is basically just another way to do the same thing that our level 1 ability gives us, but of course our level 1 ability is only once per short rest, whereas we can do this, well, at the moment once per short rest, but we're able to do it a bit more per short rest. However, this build actually does have a lot of retraining of spells. You'll be kind of training things in and out, replacing them as you level up, so this isn't staying here for long. The other spell that I could recommend that also comes from Mistress Spells is Cause Fear, which does the same thing as Charm Person, but it's instead frightens the target. So we have 2 potential ways of charming and frightening the target here, meaning that we're pretty much always going to have ways to manipulate our opponents in battle. However, if you do feel like this is a bit overkill, there are a few other options available to you. The obvious being Fairy Fire or Sleep, Patch's Hideous Laughter, Hex, Armour of Agathis is also a really good spell, and then we also have things from Mistress Spells like ID Insinuation, not entirely sure how that's pronounced, which can deal a big dollop of psychic damage, and also things like Bane as well. So feel free to kind of pick up whatever you think is appropriate for you here. At Warlock level 2, we're going to gain that extra Warlock spell slot as well as access to Invocations. We do get to pick another spell at this point, and I am going to be grabbing Armour of Agathis. It's a great spell, giving us extra temporary hit points and dealing 5 cold damage to any creature that hits us with a melee attack. But also it's going to give us that kind of ethereal, misty aura that I think just fits this build extremely well. So Armour of Agathis is a definite pickup for here. We're also going to gain access to Eldritch Invocations, and you've got a few options here. First up, I would recommend Agonizing Blast. That's just going to give us a big bump to our, Eldritch Blast, allowing it to do extra damage to our, equal to our Charisma modifiers. So overall, it's just a big damage boost. You all know what Agonizing Blast does. I don't know why I'm even bothering to go over it. But there are some other things here, and you do have quite a few options. Definitely, at some point in the build, you are going to need to pick up Devil's Sight. It is going to be quite important to us, so I'm going to grab it here. But I would say you could also pick up Beguiling Influence to gain proficiency in Deception and Persuasion, because we absolutely want that as well on this build. So you have a lot of options available to you. Next up at Warlock level 3, we get to choose our Pact Boon and a level 2 spell. Now you may be thinking, well, we just took Devil's Sight, so obviously we're going to take Darkness here, right? No, actually, we're going to get that later. For now, we're going to want to actually pick up something else. And you're thinking, oh, yeah, well, obviously, okay, he's not taking Darkness. He's absolutely going to take Misty Step. Also, no. Again, we're going to get that later. So you do have a bit more freedom in terms of what you actually want to pick up at this level. Mirrored Illusion would be absolutely great. I could see that working, giving you additional armor class buffs. What else is there here? We've got some other level 2 things From Mistress Spells, you can go for Mind Spike, dealing psychic damage, Mental Barrier, protecting you from, mental saving throws and such like that. There's a ton of different things you could do here. Nathier's Mischief could also be a fun spell. Really, it's entirely up to you what you want to pick here. Just make sure you're actually not picking Darkness or Misty Step, because again, that's going to become relevant later. I quite like the idea of this build doing psychic damage, so I think I will be picking up Mind Spike here, giving us the ability to invade the mind of a target, dealing 3d8 psychic damage and preventing them from turning invisible. Bit of a weird effect on that second bit there, but hey, it could certainly come up against things like Anti-Ethel or Yurgia, so I would definitely recommend picking it up. Next up for our Pact Boon. Honestly, you can pick any of these. Even though we're going to be using melee weapons in this build, we're still going to get extra attack from Monk eventually, spoilers. So you will get extra attack no matter whether or not you take Pact of the Blade. I did take Pact of the Blade for the final version of this build, because for those of you who don't know, this specific version of of extra attack that we get from Pact of the Blade at level 5 when we get deep into Pact, stacks with the regular extra attack from other classes, meaning that you get 2 extra attacks, which is very, very important. That's 3 attacks per turn, meaning that to get the most damage output out of this build on difficulties of Tactician or lower, you're going to want to get Pact of the Blade. It also allows you to use your spellcasting ability modifier instead of Dexterity, but it doesn't really matter when everything's said and done, because our spellcasting modifiers and our Dexterity modifier are going to be the same without equipment, so which is all going to be 18, so it's entirely up to you if you really want to take this or not. The main thing is going to be the additional extra attack, which feels very, very nice to use, but otherwise the other options do work. Pact of the Chain definitely does exist. Again, I do find ways of I find it hard to recommend this. A lot of the time the familiars just aren't that great, but somebody may find a use out of them, and you may find that they have certain advantages with the setup that we have, but overall I do think this is the weaker option, but if you want it, you can certainly take it. The other thing would be Pact of the Tome, which would be very, very nice to have. You gain 3 really useful cantrips at this level, being Guidance, Vicious Mockery, and Thorn Whip, which in my opinion all fit this build very, very well. And then later on, at level 5, you would gain access to things like Haste, Cool Lightning, and Animate Dead. Haste obviously being a very powerful spell, which could help us out, but we do have other concentration options that I'd want to focus on, so unfortunately, I am going to be going with Pact of the Blade here, but Tome and Chain are both viable options. It's just in this specific case, Blade is the most efficient, so that's what we're going for. And at this point we can replace a spell, and if you really do think that Charm Person and Cause Fear are completely unnecessary, then you could train them out here for something else that you think might be valuable. I actually think that you could pick up something like Mirror Image, like I said here, so I think we'll grab that. At Warlock level 4, we're going to get a few things, namely another cantrip, entirely up to you what you want to pick here. We can go for Mind Sliver though. Mind Sliver gives us a 2d6 psychic damage cantrip that allows us to throw a psychic spike into a creature's mind, inflicting a negative 1d4 penalty to saving throws until the end of our next turn. So this allows us to inflict a penalty on saving throws, which will come in very handy for charm and fear effects. So I absolutely recommend picking this one up here. I know obviously we're speccing into Eldritch Blast for the damage, but we still have legitimate reasons to use things like Mind Sliver in order to be able to gain the most out of our other abilities. We also get to pick another spell at this level, and it's up to you to choose what you want to have. I think Enthrall works amazingly for this build flavor-wise. It's a level 2 enchantment spell that reduces a creature's peripheral vision to force it to look at you. Now that wording makes it seem a bit weird, and you probably wonder what utility the spell has. Mainly for me here, it's for flavor, because again we are this ethereal beauty who charms their enemies, which is weird for me to say out loud without sounding a bit strange, and so Enthrall does feel like it makes sense. However, we are going to get an upgraded version of the spell later, so we will be training this out at some point. We also do get to pick another feat at this level, and we are going to be scrolling straight down to the bottom to the Tasha's feats, which again, pretty much going to be featured on all my builds now because they are very balanced and come from tabletop, so it makes sense to use them here. And we're going to be going with Fey Touched for this build. You could use Shadow Touched, which would allow you to learn the invisibility spell and a level 1 spell of your choice from the Illusion or Necromancy School of Magic, and also bump up one of your spellcasting stats by 1. This could give you access to invisibility and the possibility to grab Colour Spray, Disguise Self, False Life, Inflict Wounds, or Ray of Sickness. Unfortunately, these the mod that gives us these Tasha's feats and the mod that gives us Tasha's spells don't have compatibility with each other yet, so you're not going to get the Mistress spells or the Tasha spells on the spell lists, unfortunately. Hopefully a compatibility patch comes out that will allow that to happen. But until now, you're stuck with just getting the vanilla spells from here. But between getting invisibility or misty step from Fey Touched and being able to choose from the divination and enchantment schools, I do think Fey Touched does edge out the win here. And again, Fey Touched, it does make sense. So we're going to be using this to bump up our wisdom to a total of 18 and picking up another spell. Now, Misty Step can be used once per long rest without using a spell slot, but we can also cast it with spell slots after that. So getting a free Misty spell per long rest as a Warlock, it's very nice. So, but we also do get to pick another spell, and I'm going to be picking Command. Command is an amazing spell in this game, allowing you to command your opponents to do various things like halt, come closer, run away, drop their weapon. Again, it feels like the perfect build for the perfect spell for the theme that we're going for here. So I think that Command works too well not to take, and the fact that we get this all from one feat is just absolutely brilliant. At Warlock level 5, we're going to gain access to Deepened Pact, which gives us extra attack, but it's also where you get all that other stuff if you picked the other Pact boons. We're also going to gain access to level 3 spells at this point, and for our level 3 spell that we're going to be taking first, I am going to recommend to you... What was it? Let me find it real quick. Give me 1 second. Ah, yes. Gaseous Form. Now we can literally turn into mist, or turn one of our allies into mist. We cannot fall, we fit through very small openings, and we are very hard to damage. We also have advantage on Constitution, Dexterity, and Strength saving throws. Basically, we gain a bunch of resistances and also a high AC, and we can just kind of boom, dodge around things as a literal ball of mist, which felt appropriate for this build. We also do gain another Eldritch Invocation at this point, and at this point, we're going to pick up Beguiling Influence to make use of that Charisma stat that we have. We're also going to be replacing Enthrall, as I said. That's Mind Spike. We're going to be replacing Enthrall, as I said. And that means we're going to be able to pick up what I consider to be the upgraded version for this build, Insight Greed. It allows us to charm all nearby creatures into walking peacefully towards us. It's literally the siren calling the sailor into the ocean type thing. This actually is a charming effect though, whereas Enthrall is kind of just a different thing. So you may actually find that you don't want to replace Enthrall and may just want to have both of these spells. However, in my testing, I did find that Insight Greed just seemed to work better overall, so we're going to be taking that here. At level 6, we're going to gain access to our Archfey Warlock subclass feature, Misty Escape. So on the off chance that all of our charming, frightening, and just frankly dodging effects fail, we are going to be able to use Misty Escape. Upon taking damage, we become invisible. Straight up. And on our next turn, you can cast Misty Step for free, though this will break through your invisibility, and this can be used once per short rest. Overall, I like the idea of like this almost being flavored as like when you finally get through your brain starts to fight through the temptation and the charming, and you finally take a swing at your foe, all you struck was an illusion. And then the real fight begins as they teleport behind you, Nothing Personnel Kid style. I don't know, I kind of like this feature. I think it just makes so much sense for what we're trying to go for here. So Misty Escape is absolutely going to work for us here. We do also gain access to another level 3 spell, and I would say you have a few options here. Cause Fear, or just Fear, is a great spell, allowing you to cause multiple enemies to become fearful, dropping their weapons. There's also Hypnotic Pattern, allowing you to hypnotize creatures, meaning they cannot attack you and they cannot move or act. And so that could be very good for incapacitating your enemies. There's also Counterspell, the classic, and Blink, allowing you to blink into the ethereal plane, turning into a misty ball. I feel like that could also work out quite nicely for you. There's a ton of options here. There's also things like Enemies Abound, causing enemies to become confused. There's Intellect Fortress, giving you self-resistance to psychic damage. There is Psionic Blast, just being able to do big amounts of force damage. Entirely up to you what you want to pick here, but I do think something like Hypnotic Pattern or Fear does make the most sense. I'm going to go with Hypnotic Pattern. Again, at this point, you can also replace a spell. I might replace Cause Fear, since we are a Warlock and our spell slots are just whatever they are anyway, with the regular Fear at this point, because it is a straight upgrade. And we're done with Warlock. Now let's head over back to Monk at total level 8. At level 2 of Monk, we're going to gain a bit more unarmored movement, increasing our movement speed, as well as being able to get patient defense, making it so attack rolls have disadvantage against us, and we have advantage on dexterity saving throws. We also gain the ability to dash or disengage as a bonus action. Unfortunately, these all do cost key points, but hey, we'll have enough of those. At level 3 of Monk, we do get to pick our subclass, and you probably have figured this one out already. We're going with Way of Shadow. Way of Shadow is going to give us access to a ton of cool things that fit the flavour of this build brilliantly. We get the ability to hide as a bonus action, so between the monk stuff that we got at 2nd level and this, we're kind of a rogue now. We also get Passive Outtrace, allowing us to gain a +10 bonus to all stealth checks for ourselves and our allies. We also get Darkness, we also get Dark Vision, and we also get Silence, as well as Minor Illusion as a cantrip. Now you may be thinking, well, we could have just taken Darkness as a Warlock and then gone with Way of the Four Elements or Open Hand to get a bit more oomph out of our stuff. However, this is why I love Monk and Warlock as a multi-class. Monk has a small amount of spell slots that recover on a short rest. Monk has key points that recover on a short rest. By having Darkness cast using our key points instead of our spell slots, we're more free to use those spell slots for other powerful effects, meaning that having 2 independent resources for casting spells technically means we're better with resource management, if that makes sense. Now, obviously, the big caveat to all of this is that yes, Darkness, Fear, a lot of our spells, they all use concentration. You're going to have to pick and choose what you want to do. 90% of the time, that probably is going to be Darkness, so you may find that other spells may be better options for you, things that are non-concentration based. But, again, I like to show off all the options that I think are the most on theme for the build, but feel free to change around the spell selections as you see fit. Yes, Darkness is mainly going to be your bread and butter. Otherwise, you do have other options available to you. And Minor Illusion is always a fun cantrip to have. It's like having a pocket cat on demand, which I guess Find Familiar does too. So if you're into pocket cats, take back to the chain. Everybody loves a good pocket cat as a treat. That implies you're going to eat the cat. Never mind. Anyways, next up we get Slow Fall, which gives us resistance to falling damage. Don't jump off of cliffs, even if it hurts you a bit less. It can still kill you. Next up, we do get to take an ability score improvement at this point, and we are going to take an ability score improvement at this point, bumping up that charisma. At Monk level 5, we're going to gain access to extra attack as well as stunning strike with both our weapon and unarmed strikes. Like I said, extra attack from here stacks with the Pact of the Blade extra attack, meaning now at total level 11, we now have as many extra attacks as a full level 11 fighter would have. That's pretty good. We're also getting access to Stunning Strike, like I said, which can possibly stun a target, meaning that they can't do jack shit for a turn, which is really powerful. And finally, we have Cloak of Shadows, allowing us to wrap ourselves in shadows and become invisible if we are obscured. So if we throw up our Darkness Cloud, we could just turn invisible and escape whenever we want to. We could also turn invisible from Misty Escape. You see where Way of Shadow and Archfey do start to overlap with cool thematic connections here. There's a lot of teleporting and invisibility here. Speaking of teleporting, at level 6 of Shadow Monk, we gain Key Empowered Strikes, allowing us to overcome resistance and immunity to non-magical damage with our unarmed strikes, more unarmored movement, but namely Shadow Step, teleporting from shadow to shadow, and afterwards we have advantage on our next melee attack roll. Can be used as a bonus action, doesn't cost key points, so as long as you're in darkness or some sort of obscured area, you can teleport without having to use spell slots or key points. Obviously, this is amazing. We can now teleport with Misty Step, Misty Escape, Shadow Step, and we just have a ton of movement speed anyway because we're a monk. We can get anywhere we need to in the battlefield. We can throw up the Cloud of Darkness and then basically teleport wherever we like. This is awesome. I love these combinations of abilities. Now, obviously it comes with the caveat that really, depending on how you level this, you're either only going to get Shadow Step at level 7 or 6, or you're going to get it at total level 12. But honestly, I think Shadow Step is okay to get last, because up till now, all of our teleports use some form of resource, whereas now, they don't. As long as we do the proper setup or are fighting in an appropriate area, we can teleport indefinitely, which is amazing. So it feels like kind of the final form of what we're trying to accomplish here. So yeah, let's keep going. And that is the build. Overall, what you're going to be getting out of this is a very mobile character. You're going to be dealing an absolutely massive amount of damage with our multiple extra attacks when using our monk weapon, which I'll get into in a minute. You're also going to have a lot of options with your bonus action attack, or flurry of blows to deal massive amounts of damage, precisely 1d6 plus 8, twice. You're also going to be able to charm and beguile your foes using Fey Presence and our other charm and fear-based effects like Command, command, fear, and a bunch of other stuff. Like, you're going to have a lot of fun with this hypnotic pattern. You also do gain big damage attacks from our Warlock spells like Booming Blade and Eldritch Blast, as well as being able to really dampen your enemy's resistances with things like Mind Sliver, and also just being able to do big dollops of psychic damage, which is not often resisted. And again, if all push comes to shove, Gaseous Form is a great defensive spell for you. You just have so many options here for maneuverability, being able to be stealthy as well. You have a pretty high stealth score with this build when all is all said and done, and Cloak of Shadows being able to turn you invisible can be really, really useful. You just have so much to work with here that I really just think that this build has such a ton of fun flavour, and again, it's an unorthodox multiclass, but the feeling that you get while playing it just makes it feel so unique compared to everything else. Again, we have 2 level 3 spell slots and 7 key points. Both of these recover on a short rest, so we're very, very resource efficient. Just pop a short rest and we get everything back. We could just keep cycling this over and over and over again. Get a bard in your party and get 3 short rests. You're going to be doing pretty well. But anyways, obviously this build is great, but we really do want to have the equipment to make it even better. So let's take a look at that. For our weapon, we're going to be using something that I don't use very often, but is a very, very cool weapon indeed. We have the Harmonic Dueler. This is why we needed to pick a background that gives us performance proficiency, because this is a fairly standard rapier just by looking at it. You get a +1 enchantment, so maybe throw the Drake Throat Glaive on this one, but you are going to get a unique ability with this weapon, that being Mellow Harmony. You make a performance check, there it is, which is a DC 15 by the way, so it's a bit tricky, but our high charisma plus our performance skill proficiency will allow us to succeed this most of the time, and a success grants all of your melee attacks additional damage equal to your charisma modifier. That's pretty huge, and can be used once per short rest. Again, all of our resources come back on a short rest, so if I quickly short rest, kablam, we get it back. And I absolutely love this feature, because when it goes off, and because I don't have the performance proficiency, it's only a 55% chance to succeed. Make sure you get that performance proficiency. Please work. It did not work. But basically, if it did work, you don't screw it. We're going to give it another try. I want you guys to see this. Come on, let's do this. Let's do this. Let's do this. Let's do this. Come on, do it. There you go. You get this lovely ethereal glow about you, and this melodious hum kind of plays in the background. It's beautiful, and it fits this build perfectly, and the power boost that it gives us cannot be understated, so I really, really like having it. And overall, the design of the weapon just feels so elegant and mystical that it fits perfectly with this build, so in my opinion, the Harmonic Dueler is the way to go. Next up, let's keep going. We're going to be looking at our regular equipment now, starting off with the Birthright Hat to give us a +2 to our charisma, meaning that we can go up to 20 charisma. Thanks to Pact of the Blade, that's going to give both our Warlock spellcasting and our weapon attacks a bit of a boost. However, this is not necessary. 18 charisma is perfectly fine, so an alternative to this could be the Bone Spike Helmet. Now, usually this is used by barbarians, which whenever you rage, it would deal extra psychic damage, but we're not here for that. What we're here for is a +2 to our intimidation checks and the ability to use the Battlemaster Fighter's menacing attack, allowing us to deal a little bit of extra damage with our attack and possibly frighten the target, and we can use this every turn, once per turn. There's no resource requirement here like the superiority die that you would normally have to use with Battlemaster Fighter. So overall, it's just more damage every turn, and you might think that ends up being better. For an early game alternative, there's a headband called the Shadespell Circlet, which I've included a link to in the description because for some reason I forgot to get it here, which whenever you're obscured in shadow or in darkness, you gain a bonus to your spell save DC. So that works nice for the early game because it fits on theme for the build. But for your end game, you either want the Birthright Hat or the Bone Spike Helmet. And I forgot to mention it because the Harmonic Dueler is an Act 3 weapon. The early game weapon you can use is the Sword of Screams, which is a standard rapier that does 1d4 extra psychic damage, so it's worth picking up. Next up, the Cloak of Displacement, one I've used a lot recently, but hey, it's because it's good, and it works for this build. At the beginning of the wearer's turn, the cloak activates, basically casting the spell Blur on you, giving enemies disadvantage on attack rolls that target you, and this effect lasts until you take damage, but of course it restarts at the start of your every turn. Basically, you become this shimmering, ethereal, misty form that is harder to hit. Fits perfectly for the build, no notes. Next up, the Potent Robe. Your cantrips deal additional damage equal to your Charisma modifier, and at the beginning of the wearer's turn, the robe activates, granting them temporary hit points equal to their Charisma modifier and a +1 to armor class. Now, I know I said the patron of this build is a little bit evil, but just because your patron is evil doesn't mean you need to kill all the tieflings. I'm just saying. It's just that your fighting style is a bit underhanded, in which that you charm your enemies. Doesn't mean that you can't save the tieflings and get this robe. I'm just saying, it is probably one of the better robes for this. That buff to our armor class is really nice, giving us a total of 19 when all is said and done with our monk on armored defense, and allowing our cantrips to deal additional damage. That's going to make our Eldritch Blast deal even more damage, but also our Booming Blade and Mind Sliver get a pretty damn decent boost as well. So I think it's absolutely worth getting this. The temporary hit points are really nice if you're not using Armor of Agathis or your Armor of Agathis has run out. So overall, I think this is just too perfect not to use, but there are other options available to you if you so desire. If you are playing an evil run, maybe pick up the Infernal Robe. But I know that most people don't like the consequences of getting the Infernal Robe, so I don't know, it's up to you. But I think the Potent Robe is the best one for the job. Now, we already know what this is, the Gloves of Dexterity, setting our Dexterity score to 18. This build literally would not work without it. So giving us a total of 18 Dex, 18 Wisdom, and 20 Charisma by the end of the day. My Con score, like I said, is still a little bit low, so maybe if you want to keep the Birthright hat on and maybe put those 2 points into Constitution instead of Charisma, so having an 18 here and a 16 here, you're absolutely good. Up to you. And finally, for our boots, you have 2 options. For a late game option, you can pick up the Boots of Uninhibited Kashigo, giving you additional damage on your unarmed strikes equal to your Wisdom modifier. So because we have an 18 Wisdom, this is just going to give us a bit more oomph with our unarmed strikes with the base d6 damage that they deal. This feels pretty nice. But if you want to go for the early game option and stay there, you can go for the Disintegrating Nightwalkers. Yes, I know this is probably the most used piece of equipment on the channel, but hey, it makes too much sense for this build. You cannot be enwebbed, entangled, or ensnared, and cannot slip on grease or ice. Makes sense for this build. As well as being able to cast Misty Step without expending a spell slot, once per short rest. I mean, how could you not, right? Makes too much sense not to grab this in the early game, and then if you want to, you can swap to the Power Boots in the late game. Moving on to our accessories, and speaking of Misty Step, we have the Amulet of Misty Step, which does give us another usage of Misty Step once per short rest without using without using a spell slot, I should say. So yeah, we get more teleporting. I mean, what's not to love? We want as much teleporting as we can with this build, so we definitely want to pick it up. We also gain the Ring of Arcane Synergy. Whenever we deal damage with a cantrip, so for us that's Mind Sliver, Eldritch Blast, or Booming Blade, we gain Arcane Synergy, which means that our spellcasting modifier is added to the damage rolls of our weapon attacks. I mean, using this with Booming Blade, which is a weapon attack and a cantrip, I mean, you do just kind of get more damage for free. That's a lot of damage. This ring is very, very good for this build. Absolutely use it. And finally, the Shadow Cloaked Ring. The weapon's wearing... Oh my god, I stuffed that one up. The wearer's weapon and unarmed strikes deal an additional 1d4 damage against lightly or heavily obscured creatures and creatures made of shadow. Obviously, because we're a Way of Shadow monk, we are going to be wanting to fight in darkness as much as we can. And also being able to create darkness whenever we want means that we're basically going to have this ring up 100% of the time. Meaning that all of our weapon and unarmed strikes gain an additional 1d4 of damage. On top of everything else I just listed. Yeah, this build is extremely powerful, and that's where we'll kind of get into the build summary. For the camp clothing, I am using the Elegant Robe, which is vanilla, with the gladiatorial sandals, coloured in the Ogma dye from the Faerunian Colours mod, again, available on all platforms. But let's talk about the build itself. This is the glass cannon to end all glass cannons, I think. This build is pretty goddamn squishy. We're sitting at an 87 HP, and we have a lot of concentration spells, which can be broken with our mediocre constitution that we don't even have proficiency on the saving throws with. So obviously, that's a big problem. The big deal of this build is a lot of damage, and we're mainly going to be trying to avoid attacks rather than take them. 19 AC ain't bad. As well as the fact that we have the ability to charm and frighten enemies to prevent them from attacking us, as well as having things like with the Cloak of Displacement to invoke disadvantage on attacks against us, and Patient Defense to allow that to happen as well, and the ability to be able to teleport out of danger, really makes it so that we shouldn't be getting hit all too often. We also do have the ability to go for powerful opening rounds. While we don't have sneak attack, we can still stealth in and do some damage. Like, honestly, in reality, yes, this build does have a kind of glaring weakness, but the benefits outweigh that weakness, and we have so many ways to mitigate that weakness that I'm not too worried about it. Again, think about all the extra damage you're going to get on your weapon attacks between Harmonic Dueler, arcane synergy, the shadow cloaked ring, the potent robe, the boots of uninhibited Kashigo. Just everything. Like, you have, like, if you go for the menacing attack route as well, that's extra damage on, like, one of your attacks per turn. Booming Blade, then menacing attack. Like, Booming Blade is really good here. Like, I know I made the whole thing about Mistress Bell saying, they're balanced, they're fine. They're only as balanced as they are in tabletop, and, well, Booming Blade is kind of powerful in tabletop. So, but it's fine. All of this is fine because it's just an awesome build. I love the flavor, I love the theming, and it's got me thinking. Obviously, the deity build series has ended, and that's kind of was a big thing for the channel. But what if we went down the other route? Obviously, I base this build on the Queen of Air and Darkness, a potential Archfey patron. What if we looked at builds based on other potential patrons? Maybe a new series, the Patron build series. The only caveat being that obviously with the Deity build series, we had a lot of subclasses to take from Cleric, whereas in this game, Vanilla, we only have 3 classes, but at the moment everyone has access to an additional one, that being the Celestial Warlock, which could open up a lot of avenues for us. But having to take, one level dip of Warlock every time, with only 4 subclasses to choose from, maybe we'll wait until a few more subclass mods for Warlock get released that are balanced and from tabletop and blah 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 blah. I'm going to make a quick mini channel update video at some point, basically detailing what the future of this channel is going to be when it comes to mods and just kind of explain how I plan to move forward with them, because obviously they're in all my videos now, which some people are taking umbrage with, which is understandable. But I do want to kind of express that clearly I'm not just throwing in mods willy-nilly here, I'm genuinely taking balance and the D&D experience into consideration when I do these, mainly only using spells, feats, and subclasses from tabletop in these videos, which is why I'm trying to keep these things as balanced as I can. And so far, I think it's worked. Except for the Blood Sorcerer video. That shit's broken. Anyways, I think that is going to do it for me here. I really hope you enjoyed this build. I'm going to have another kind of weird video coming out soon. It might be the next video that comes out, depending on how soon I can get it done, where I'm going to be looking at the build-making statistics across the entire channel's history. We're getting pretty close to 200 build videos here, or we've met that goal or surpassed it. I don't know. I haven't checked. Probably should have checked before I started recording and making this statement, but hey-ho. And the plan there is to go back and look over every single video I've done and see which subclasses we use the least and the most, which classes we use the least and the most, because believe it or not, that's 2 different statistics, and also things like which races we used, which feats we used, etc, etc. Not magic and equipment though, that's going to be a separate video. But I hope you guys all look forward to that one, as it is going to be quite a different video that's going to take a bit more effort on my part to do. I've already had to tally up all the results for up to video 100, and they're quite shocking. Like, Barbarian is surprisingly low. In my first 100 videos here, here's a spoiler for you, I only used Barbarian 9 times. 9. Out of 100 build videos, I used Barbarian 9 times. That's weird to me. I didn't realize I did that. We're going to have to make some more Barbarian builds. Anyway, that is going to do it for me. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all next time. Bye-bye.